Hi, everybody. This is John Gallagher, co-host of Inside Michigan Business podcast, and we are broadcasting right now from the studios of Startup Nation in Birmingham. With my co-host, Jack Lessenberry, we're going to be talking about Detroit Startup Week. We're in the middle of it right now, which is a celebration of all things entrepreneurship here in Metro Detroit. So, Jack, veteran news analyst Jack Lessenberry, your thoughts on Detroit Startup Week?
Well, I think it's sort of amazing. As you were telling me, John, I don't think anyone 15 or 20 years ago would have thought we'd have come as far as we had by the end of last year. And then, of course, nobody in January thought we'd be here now. And we're lucky enough to have sort of the godfather of startups with us, Jeff Sloan, who's not only the founder of Startup Nation, he wrote a really good book called Startup Nation with his brother 15 years ago. Jeff, did you write that book before you founded the company?
No, actually, we wrote the book. I think the book was roughly 2005,
Yep.
And Startup Nation was founded in 2002.
Right. So you're the startup godfather. And I want to ask you one question that maybe sound simple, because I am, but what defines a startup? And when does the company cease to be a startup?
Yeah, that's a good question. It's funny. You know, we still see Startup Nation in a way as a startup. We see a lot of our companies years into it as a startup. So the question, while simple, is actually the answer to it may be complex, because I think it depends on perspective. I think it also depends on where you are. You know, definitions of startup and early stage have different meanings in, say, Silicon Valley versus here in Detroit. You know, I think generally startup is, some may say pre-revenue, some may say, you know, shortly after launch, some may say, prior to significant team member growth. I think there's different ways to define it. I think it's more of a feel than a specific definition.
So at some point, when does a company age out or get so big that they're not a startup anymore? Do you have any kind of rough definition in your head?
Well, I mean, okay. I think that, you know, for example, the SBA defines small business as 100 employees or under. There's various definitions. That's one of them. I think certainly when you eclipse that kind of mark, you certainly don't qualify as a startup anymore.
So, I'm sorry, Jeff.
No, go ahead.
Okay, well, back in 2002, then, when you started Startup Nation, you know, that was before TechTown was started, before Ann Arbor Spark was started. You know, the auto companies were still the only game in town. So what did you see back in 2002?
Well, and funny enough, we started Startup Nation in 2002, but we actually started in startups back in the early 90s. I mean, we were doing this, you know, really in earnest from like 94 on. I had invented the Battery Buddy, a device that prevents dead batteries in cars and boats, which really kicked off my experience as an entrepreneur in kind of technology-related, venture-related activities. From there, you know, we were growing a series of companies in our venture portfolio. I don't think the term incubator or accelerator certainly didn't exist at that time, but that's, again, intuitively, just the kind of the feel of an entrepreneur, doing what we felt was the right thing to do at the moment. We were creating these startup companies, and then we were getting a lot of inbound deal flow, people wanting help and getting their ventures started, getting them structured properly, getting them funded, and so on. But we also were getting a lot of inbound contact from entrepreneurs who had meritorious business ideas that weren't high growth, fast growth venture type businesses. And so we said, look, let's start, at the time we didn't have the brand, but let's start a company, an online portal to provide how-to information and inspiration to entrepreneurs out there whose models don't fit a venture fast growth type model, that wouldn't qualify for angel investment or venture capital type investment and so on. So we did that. We founded Startup Nation. And, you know, back then, Startup Nation was the only game in town. There weren't the incubators and accelerators during this, you know, really, you know, incredibly productive Dan Gilbert era, if you want to call it that. He really kind of kicked it all off downtown. You know, we were loners doing very unique things back then, taking big risks and challenges and so on, and setting hopefully some good examples. We had some good success early on, but there were not many of us doing what we were doing.
You know, Jeff Sloan, there's a million people out there that have an idea for something. They want to do a startup, and some of them are afraid to start. Some of them want to do it, but have no idea how to do it. What advice do you give folks?
Well, I mean, there's a series of things I would say that are key. Maybe I'll give you two or three to start with. One, you obviously have to make sure you have a good idea. And you can't just ask your mom or your wife or your sister or brother, whatever it may be, you know, is it a good idea? You want to hear pushback that's really valuable. It's better to have an idea that ultimately doesn't end up as a business, because it's going to, you know, zap all of your resources, energy, focus, et cetera, on an idea that isn't good. So first, validate the idea. Validate the idea. There's a lot of ways to do that. We can get into whatever detail you want, but certainly you have to make sure you have a meritorious idea, number one. Number two, you have to be equipped as an entrepreneur. Now, certainly, you talk about fear. The greatest way to mitigate fear is to equip yourself with knowledge. You've got to be on your game. You've got to know how to attack the things that are going to come at you and overcome those challenges. Funding, go-to-market strategy, hiring the right people, all those basics, fundamentals, the blocking and tackling, you've got to be equipped to handle. And then I think three, I'll throw this one in there. You have to be equipped emotionally and spiritually, I think, too. It is a tough journey. It is a tough journey. If you look at the numbers, it's daunting, those that succeed versus those that fail. And so you really need to be prepared to overcome challenge and have that tenacity and fortitude to fight through the inevitable challenges that all startups face.
Yeah. I've been dipping into all the panels of Detroit Startup Week, and it really is, drinking from the fire hose.
Right.
So what would you like people to take away? There's almost 200 speakers this week at Startup Week. What would you like them to take away?
Well, here's the thing that I'm amazed by. I got a chance to do a couple of interviews of some really great entrepreneurs yesterday. We just talked about how tough it is. But the companies that are highlighted here, I'm finding, are really exciting. They really are. They're the shining examples of those that are getting through the filter, of success versus failure. And I think there's knowledge is great, information is great, fundamental blocking and tackling, but inspiration that comes from these others that are out there doing it and being able to say, hey, he or she is doing it, maybe I can do it. I think I can do it. I think that comes with a lot of what we're experiencing in Startup Week.
Good.
One sort of question I've had about it is we understand, or we think we do, how to deal with a recession, maybe even a depression, but not one caused by a pandemic, which gives special problems. And I'm wondering, there's probably a lot of people saying, oh, I'd like to start something, but is this the time? What do you say to folks like that?
Well, first of all, can you believe it? Now, you don't have to answer that. It's a rhetorical question, but can you believe it? I mean, it's tough enough to be an entrepreneur, but now this, and it's so incredible. Who can get their arms around this, really? We look back at it. I saw a picture this morning of a restaurant that's opening up with these plexiglass cylinders that are going to be around each. I mean, I looked at it and I said, is this real or is this a dream? It just doesn't. If you showed it to me 6 months ago, I'd say, what is that nonsense?
Chewbacca's in the next booth.
Exactly. Okay, so here we are. You know what the amazing thing is, though? In times of crisis, particularly a global, deep one like this, that's going to create sweeping reform in culture and society and certainly in business, it creates opportunity. Opportunity is everywhere. Taking businesses digital, for example, is a multi-trillion-dollar opportunity right now.
Right.
Everything's going to change. Whether it's putting plexiglass up in restaurants to create barriers, or whether it's taking businesses online with the newest digital technologies and formats and so on. There is so much opportunity right now. I think this is an amazing time to be bold and get out there and start a business. Incredible.
Wow. Well, and a lot of existing entrepreneurs figured out how to stay in business. Curbside pickup and all the rest of that stuff. It's been pretty impressive. I know it's really hard times for people, but still, the amount of creativity that went into staying in business has been pretty impressive.
The great pivot, right, of 2020, the great pivot, the
Which
great
we've always
reinvention.
done all our lives, after all. I mean, people like John and I remember the day before the internet.
That's right.
There you go. Look what the internet did. I'm going to tell you, we're going to see change out of this period of time, commensurate with that kind of really sweeping change like that. It's interesting. You talk about those that are, some are reinventing, those that are succeeding. It's incredible. But before we might have reinvented, you said we've done that all the time. We do. As entrepreneurs, you have to be flexible and able to react to the marketplace and make changes and so on. It's one thing, though, when your sales drop from 20% to 18% margin and you say, we better make a change. That's one thing. This is literally reinvention defined. This is maybe starting over, curbside pickup, getting rid of the inside dining, all the rest that goes we all know so well. So this is really...
Zoom.
Zoom. There we are. Zoom.
How many people knew what Zoom was 3 months ago?
I suspect somebody who's instead of inventing a better mousetrap, we're trying to invent a better face shield or a better mask, and somebody's doing that.
They're doing it.
But so do you have before I know you've got to run, you've got a million things going, but is there any advice or any watchwords you'd give young people, entrepreneurs, would-be entrepreneurs, startups?
I'm going to go back to the question that one of the two you asked before about, is this a good time to start a business? Boy, this is the land of opportunity right now. I'm telling you, we will look back on this period of time. There are going to be great companies born out of this period of time. And it's counterintuitive. You know,
Right.
the question was asked because it's counterintuitive to think the answer could be yes, it's a great time. But we will look back on this period of time and we will say that pandemic caused major change, which created major opportunity, out of which were born some of the great companies of the future. No question.
Napoleon once said, "I'm surrounded and outnumbered. The only thing I can do is attack." So,
That's it.
Things are
I mean,
great. Things are great.
Jeff Sloan, thank
Yeah.
you so much
Yeah, hey,
for
Thanks,
making
Jeff.
time for
Thanks.
us today.
Thank you very
Thanks
much.
being with you guys. Appreciate it. Yeah.
Appreciate it.
Okay.
Okay,
Thank you.
well, let's bring in our next two guests. Pamela Lewis, who is director of the New Economy Initiative, and she'll explain what that's all about. And Amy Rencher, who is director of small business initiatives and entrepreneurship at TechTown, the business mentoring organization at Wayne State University. So, Pam, are you there?
I am here. How are you?
Terrific. There you are. We can see you now. And Amy, are you here too? There you
There
are.
we
How you
go.
doing, Amy?
Afternoon.
Good.
I'm here.
Good. Okay, Pam, let me start with you. You brought out a survey, I think, just this week, if I'm correct, and a pretty startling statistic in there that 40% of Detroit residents consider themselves entrepreneurs. Can you unpack that for us a little bit?
Yeah. This is a really cool body of work that we did at the New Economy Initiative in partnership with Detroit Future Cities. For your listeners, NEI, New Economy Initiative, is a collaborative of foundations that started 12 years ago. And we're grant makers and conveners, and we've been investing in business support organizations like TechTown, who Amy works for, and others that are helping small businesses. So we partner with our friends at University of Michigan, Detroit Metro Area Community Study, and Detroit Future Cities. And we were asking the question, this is pre-COVID though, what is the perception of entrepreneurship in a city like Detroit? And we talked to 700 survey respondents. And interestingly enough, how entrepreneurship is defined by the community of Detroit, I don't think necessarily matches how you define entrepreneurship when you read, Michael Porter's books, et cetera. But people that are self-employed, people that are sole proprietors, people that are actually running brick and mortar businesses, people that are working on social innovations for their community. The community of Detroit, the people that were surveyed, saw all of these types of folks as entrepreneurs, and 40% of them identified as an entrepreneur. So we thought that was interesting because we do think the definition of entrepreneur could be challenged because often it's limited to tech and venture. But for the citizens of Detroit, they see the definition of entrepreneurship much broader than that.
Well, after all, Pam, once upon a time, there was kind of a cranky mechanic who had an idea of using something called an assembly line to make a whole lot of cars really fast, which created Detroit. But I'm wondering, Pam Lewis and Amy also, how do you define what an entrepreneur is, what entrepreneurism is?
Amy, do you want to take that?
Sure. I mean, first, thanks for having us on board here. A bit about TechTown. So again, my name is Amy Rencher. I'm the Director of Small Business Initiatives and Entrepreneurship there. We are just a point of, I was hoping we'd still have Jeff on the phone because we do predate Startup Nation. We were founded in 2000 in partnership with Wayne State University, Henry Ford Health System, and General Motors. So
We'll
point of
tell him.
pride, I got to put it out there.
We'll tell him, Amy.
Yeah, but we are 130,000 square foot co-working conference and event center, as well as a business incubator accelerator, serving both sides of the house, tech and sort of traditional small business. So we see a lot of we see the full spectrum really here in the city. And so when you think about the question you posed, what is an entrepreneur? It's funny. We were going through a planning exercise the other day and had a bunch of terms up on the computer screen on Zoom. But everything from a side hustle is a term we hear a lot in Detroit. People saying sort of my brand, or I'm the CEO, sole proprietor, shopkeeper, retailer. There's the definitions, the terms that we use are very broad. But we're really excited about what that means in the city because it means not only the young folks that I know we've made mention of, but in the study that Pam pointed out, I was drawn to the statistic, and it doesn't surprise me. The majority of entrepreneurs that identified in the study were between 35 and 54 in the study, and that doesn't surprise me. That's the primary age range we serve in the small business side, and on the tech side, we made a lot of changes in the last year and a half, sort of specifically to make sure that we are welcoming of all kinds of entrepreneurs, women, folks with children. We've had childcare services as part of our programming on Saturdays, folks on all ends of the age spectrum, racial and ethnic makeup. And so just about anybody can be an entrepreneur. And when we dig down, we can get into some of the finer statistics. But I appreciate that point coming out of the survey from NEI Detroit Future City, because it is certainly not just young folks. And Detroit, we get to appreciate folks on all ends of the spectrum,
Yeah.
immigrant-owned businesses and the like.
Yeah. Pam, I know you did a survey, excuse me, of the entrepreneurial ecosystem a couple of years ago, and you found that how many
Mhm.
entities are there out there? I mean, more than 200 that offer some kind of services
Yeah,
for
there's a lot.
entrepreneurs.
Yeah, Southeast Michigan has been fascinating in terms of the number of business support organizations that are helping entrepreneurs and businesses. And I'm breaking it up that way because there's a portion of them that are focused on that startup phase, right, that you talked about with Jeff Sloan, but also a large number of them that are still supporting existing businesses. And it's not just the venture and tech, it's also small businesses and lifestyle businesses. And so when we did that asset scan, we looked at the entire Southeast Michigan region. There's about 220 resources that we found concentrated primarily in the city of Detroit and Ann Arbor. But what was also interesting is the number of them that were, one, there's a lot. Two, very difficult to navigate when you're talking about that many. But we were also happy to find that a good portion of them, and many of them that were funded by philanthropy, were highly connected. They were definitely saw themselves as partners. They referred to each other. They knew what the others were doing. There were not as many overlaps in terms of services. And then a portion of those that were highly connected were also ones that had more intention around reaching out to women and people of color, business owners and entrepreneurs. So that was very fascinating to see in that body of research as well.
Well, I wonder, I would guess both of you, but maybe start with Amy. We were talking with Jeff about the fact that the bottom has dropped out for a lot of these folks. They don't have money, and they're probably panicked. What can you what can you do? What are you doing for these challenged entrepreneurs because of COVID-19?
I'm really glad that you asked that question. First of all, what I want to impress upon the folks who are listening to this, the entrepreneurs and the broader public, is that there are many, many people that are very deeply invested and care very greatly about this entrepreneurial community, certainly here in Detroit and the metro region, but nationally. Small businesses provide the majority of jobs in America. They are the backbone of America and have remained so. And so, to that end, Pam has made mention of the sort of Detroit entrepreneurial ecosystem, this network of partners that we have here that bridge the tech and small business side. But a new in the era, or as a response to COVID, there's this wonderful public-private partnership group coalition that has emerged. It's called Detroit Means Business. This is a partnership with the city of Detroit, the DEGC, large corporations like DTE, Blue Cross Blue Shield, Bedrock, the convening power of PM from the New Economy Initiative, and peers like Invest Detroit and TechTown, who are coming together to leverage significant resources to support entrepreneurs. There was an initial round of PPE distribution, and we're working more to figure out what the sustainability of that looks like. Meanwhile, there's a wonderful website, DetroitMeansBusiness.org, that has just a bevy of resources from webinars on demand, live webinar and video sessions, a contact center that's open Monday through Friday, 9 a.m. to 5 p.m. for sort of immediate triage, and then also a network of subject matter experts who provide one-on-one consultations by appointment. They're provided every day, so if you can't get in the same day, you will definitely get in the next day. So I'd like to certainly call out, there's many other forces at play here, and there's a lot of folks that got us to this point. This network of partners, I'm sure it exceeds 30 at this point. It's a
Mhm.
tremendous effort, and we're one really proud of and want to stand up further.
I'd like to ask specifically about entrepreneurs of color. We've always heard that minority entrepreneurs have a harder time because they have less family and friends wealth to draw on. They face a residue of prejudice in loan applications and that kind of thing. system just seems to be stacked against them in some ways. Where are we with that, and what are the policy implications going forward for
Yeah,
either
thanks
of
for
you? Yeah.
yeah, this is Pam. Thanks for asking that question. When I was listening to Jeff, I just kept thinking about the set of challenging conditions that, apply to minority entrepreneurs. First point to make is when you're thinking about small businesses in the city of Detroit, I don't know if it's known, but the majority of those businesses are actually minority owned. And then when you think about those minority owned businesses, a lot of them are the smaller of small businesses. These are also businesses that don't necessarily have relationships with commercial banks. So when you think of the issue with COVID-19, the CARES Act came out and a lot of the SBA dollars were flowing through commercial banks, as well as you look at the history, not to put the SBA on blast, but if you look at the history of how those loans have typically fallen in communities like Detroit, um, the minority owned businesses and also a lot of the smaller businesses in our underserved community, they were at a disadvantage. Um, and so, you know, and a lot of these people were also already struggling prior to COVID. This is where, and Amy's being a little humble in terms of the work that TechTown did, but this is also where philanthropy has played a big part because we've always been focusing on this small business, and a lot of the Detroit ecosystem is set up to support them, and there were a number of activities with loan relief through our community development financed institutions that philanthropy funded, rent relief that philanthropy funded, and also the great work and leadership that TechTown did by activating a mini grant program that provided grants directly to hundreds of businesses prior to the state and federal dollars hitting the market. And so we've always had our attention on these small businesses. And I think that we have to be very careful that although this time does present opportunities for advancement and innovation, we have to make sure that those opportunities are inclusive. And so we have to pay even more attention as these businesses are coming back online. How do we ensure that the minority businesses that are already at a disadvantage are getting liquidity and capital so that they can come online faster? How do we make sure that um, as these businesses are trying to grow, that there's attention in terms of their paths to capital? So these are some of the things that we've been thinking about from an EI's perspective. To Amy's point, the Detroit Means Business Coalition is also thinking about these things. And in the same way we have to double down on entrepreneurship, we also have to double down on access to capital and to practical assistance, particularly for those led by people of color and women.
Pam Lewis, we had done an early episode of this program. We had Dennis W. Archer Jr. on, and he said he strongly encouraged minority entrepreneurs to develop a relationship with a banker, with their banker. Do you have anything to say about that or any advice on how to do it?
Yeah, I mean, there's definitely you can develop a relationship with a banker, but it also is tied. Getting loans from a banker is also tied to your own level of, you know, depth of financial liquidity. And so, what are you owning, et cetera. So it's not just a matter of creating a relationship with a bank. I'm going to let Amy speak to that too. It's much deeper than that. But this is also where the role of CDFIs, community development finance institutions, and microfinance programs come into play.
Because
And we
historically,
fortunately,
historically, minority entrepreneurs have had much less access to capital. Am I not right?
oh, absolutely. Yep.
I didn't mean to interrupt you. Go ahead. I
Amy,
just wanted to make that point.
no, I was just going to say, but this is why CDFIs and microfinance programs are so important, because there is a level of relationship with a banking institution or a lending institution that is not always easy for a minority entrepreneur to get. And we're not necessarily talking about minority entrepreneurs that are sophisticated or have, large businesses, because there's plenty of those in Detroit. I'm focusing on the minority entrepreneurs that are running those micro businesses
Mhm.
that are positioned to employ a lot of, of Detroiters. Amy, do you want to add to that?
Oh, certainly underscoring the value of the breadth and depth of the microfinance network here in Detroit. We are really a national example for this model in which entrepreneurs are accessing capital, getting coaching to access capital for the first time in smaller increments of sort of the five and $10,000 and $25,000 range in order to build the financial profile, business credit to bridge into traditional small business banking relationships. So that's the role at a minimum of the microfinance community, is to provide that entree to traditional small business lending. And then critically, I'll also note, certainly on both sides of the house, right, small business and tech, is that entrepreneurs of color also, they've been systemically um, uh, locked out of capital, but also just from their friends and family networks, right? Um, the it is well documented that the friends and family money that white entrepreneurs bring to the table is not accessible in that depth in the entrepreneurial community for entrepreneurs of color. So it's critically important that microfinance sets up that there's a measure of angel funding and grant making to make up for that lack. And there's certainly, which should be resonating well with this group, right? Historic racial inequities that point to the reasons why that is the case.
You
Yeah, and
know,
even
one,
even
I'm sorry.
from
Go ahead. Sorry. Go ahead,
well,
Pam.
from the S no, if you look at the SBA lending even prior to COVID, uh, you know, the majority of that, and that's designed for disadvantaged businesses and small businesses. Probably about 90% of that are not going to businesses of color. Um, and they're also going to very large small businesses. S- So again, it's just much more complex than just establishing, go get a relationship with a bank and you'll be fine.
Yeah, yeah. One benefit of entrepreneurship in the city of Detroit is that it aids placemaking. So I'm thinking of Agnes Street in West Village, and certainly the Midtown district, where retail entrepreneurship, numerous little walkable shops, has created and reinvented neighborhoods, neighborhood revival. And I think so. I think entrepreneurship and placemaking kind of go hand in hand in a place like Detroit.
Absolutely. Yeah, and I would love for Amy to talk about the work they've been doing in West Village and some of these other neighborhoods, but that goes without saying. It's about activating commercial corridors. It's about creating, and in that activation, it creates more safety for the community, accessible jobs for residents. So many residents that are working in Detroit are leaving Detroit to go get accessible jobs, and so creating that opportunity is very important as well. Amy, you could probably give some great examples about some of the neighborhood-based placemaking work you guys have been doing with your SWAT program and in neighborhoods across Detroit.
Certainly, and I might point us in the direction to some different communities. Livernois, the Avenue of Fashion in Northwest Detroit, is really a tremendously important Black-owned historic commercial corridor that's got more attention um, recently, but it has been our firm commitment to retain that as a historic and heritage commercial corridor. And so what that means is helping existing businesses. And this is where we get and tie back into the conversation about building up financial acumen, getting folks into the microfinance community, borrowing for the first time, borrowing a lot of money for the first time, to get them into more traditional small business banking relationships, to be able to take on lines of credit, to hire people, expand and the like. And we've certainly been a part of that. I think, also another historic corridor on the other side of the city, on the east side, the um, East Warren corridor by the Alger Theater. They're just bounded by a really nice network of communities. Cornerstone, East English Village, Morningside. That's a tremendous story unfolding there of revival and from the community itself.
Right.
I don't have the percentages on hand, but the majority of businesses through the work of a number of partners there are coming up are folks from the community. Folks like Detroit Pepper Co., Marlon Hughes and his son, a really tremendous story there. Healthy food coming back to the corridor, and other residents, longstanding residents who are either supporting other residents as entrepreneurs coming up through the community or have decided to go into their own business later in life themselves. So it's this really dynamic mix of the new and the old. And that's the challenge too, right? This is where we mirror the sort of community and economic development. We straddle the two, is that we welcome new businesses into the city, but we also need to respect the heritage and culture as a majority Black city. And so this is the very nuanced work that TechTown is very proud to be part of, as part of this network of small business support organizations tied to NEI is that we need to have these ties in the community through community development organizations. We've worked really hard in the past couple of years to partner more closely with the city and the DEGC through their district business liaisons, a really fantastic team of liaisons that represent each city council district. So it's this really intricate network of partners that we are committed to. That means we spend a lot of time with on the ground, and as of late has been a challenge. Right, we're digging in more to how we bridge these gaps digitally, but I'll just point to there's a measure we talk about sort of inclusive and equitable development when we think of like buildings, physical infrastructure in the city of Detroit. But we have the same approach for building small businesses and growing small business in the city. That there's this careful mix of sincerely welcoming in the new, but making sure we lift up the existing along the way.
Amy Rencher, where can a would-be entrepreneur, a new entrepreneur, go to find a roadmap of how to navigate? You thought a bunch of alphabet agencies, some of which I know, and some of which I don't. And I think a lot of new people might find this daunting. Where do you start?
It's a great question, Jack, and it's one we get often, right? We still find sort of 10 years into this work that folks have trouble finding the right on-ramps and inroads to that. So what I'll do a humble brag here because I think we're really proud of this. We have a program called Open Office Hours at www.techtowndetroit.org. This is a free one-on-one consultation with a member of the TechTown team. You can look up their biographies on there as a measure, again, of tech and small business. But what we're really proud of is that we have this technical expertise as small business and tech-based consultants, but also we know this network really well. We have been in it near inception. And so I'll point out TechTown's open office hours is a great way to get started. If you come to the conversation with a specific question, we can give you context for if we can't help solve for the problem, we will certainly point you to partners who can as well. And then Pam noted in the chat here, I want to make sure that we mention startup space. This is a tremendous asset as well as part of our network that helps people digitally look at the digital directory of all the small business partners here and tech partners in the ecosystem. So you can do the, for now, virtual video conferencing, which is as close to one-on-one we can get right now. But then certainly if you're looking for a sort of quick database, the startup space website is where to go.
You know, if I think of the public policy implications of all this, obviously we need to improve public transportation so people can get to these startups and employees can get back and forth. But what other public policy implications are there? Do you see what more do we need to do to really move this along? Anybody?
Well, I'll start.
So,
Just
Sure.
Go ahead, Amy.
the sort of flexible capital solutions that are at play here, right? We know that we're not out of the water yet in terms of COVID-19, and I recognize the hard work of entrepreneurs right now. It is difficult. It is filled with anxiety and uncertainty, and we're continuing to work on flexible capital solutions. So there's been rounds of some grant making. Pam made mention the TechTown Stabilization Fund, a $1.2 million fund earlier this year, benefiting over 1,000 entrepreneurs. There's the Wayne County Back to Work Grant Fund program that's going to be launched here on June 29th. So there's some short-term measure, and folks in terms of accessing traditional capital loans are really tapped at the moment. I don't see a lot of appetite for that, and rightfully so, right? Folks are operating at sort of average 20% of their margins, maybe even less at this point. But when we think of policy-oriented solutions, there's the sort of the cliche bailout, but it's necessary. And I think particularly when we think about the restaurant industry, who has taken such a hit, there has got to be some longer term strategy around providing relief for the fixed costs associated with operating right now, PPE, sanitization standards, and just knowing that we're asking folks to operate on the slimmest of margins in order to respect the public health landscape.
And I would just add to that, the Community Advantage Loan Program that is also driven out of the SBA, 1% of the total dollars lent were put into that particular program that is really designed for underserved communities and really doing work to influence a larger percentage of the dollars being through that program that is working with special lenders that are focused on underserved communities could be another start.
I've sort of
I also think there's an opportunity to there's a lot of support for venture and tech that's so important, but to also influence, uh, maybe balance the scales a little bit, focus on small business in the way that we've focused on technology commercialization and venture, particularly at the state level. I would I would say that conversation's worth having as well.
I have sort of an odd historical question. In the Detroit of my youth, I grew up here, John didn't. Actually, entrepreneurism was sort of actively discouraged by a lot of people. The goal, maybe survivors of the Great Depression, the goal was to get a job with a major firm because that would be safe and you would have a place to go. Is any of that mentality still around? Is this still a problem for you, or is that all gone now?
Well, I've been around in this work for 12 years, and I feel like what happened in the state and in Southeast Michigan and Detroit in the early 2000s, when the auto industry, we were such a single sector town,
Right.
and that got challenged in the mid 2000s. And this is where, to your point, work like NEI and the work of TechTown, they were born out of a crisis. They were born out of that economic crisis and the Great Recession. And so this is where this whole let's reinvigorate this culture of entrepreneurship in our community that's in the DNA, but we did kind of get solely focused on the single sector. And it's really been a push to not to abandon that sector because that still is the foundation of who we are. And it's so important, but to make sure that there's opportunity for people to explore and activate more diversity in our industry sectors and explore entrepreneurship as a path to job creation. So that really took place, led by the state in the mid 2000s, led by philanthropy shortly after that, and um, and you've seen the definition of an entrepreneur. Like you, I've been here all my life. Uh, you know, 15 years ago, if you were an entrepreneur, it was code word for you couldn't get a job, right? But now it really is something that's celebrated, and there is a culture of it that is alive and well. And I'm proud to say it's a culture that's pretty inclusive.
Yeah. I think the latest entry into this whole scene is the U of M's Detroit Innovation Center, which, of course, is not built yet, but it's been announced. U of M will bring about 1,000 graduate students to the east side of downtown Detroit in a project being built by Stephen Ross and Dan Gilbert. Any thoughts on that and how that may fit into the whole startup scene in Detroit?
No, I think it will be just another great asset, to add to the work of TechTown, to add to the work of Invest Detroit Ventures, add to the work of what Wayne State has done. I think we're all excited. Anything that can draw young talent to the city is so important, and I think there's such an opportunity to build on with innovation. I'm curious to see what types of does it matter the type of innovation? Is it going to be focused on mobility? Is it going to be focused on med tech, or is there going to be an opportunity to focus on innovation that solves the needs of inner city residents? It'll be interesting to see how it shakes out. So we're all positive and very excited
Is state
that that's
government
happening.
is state government meshing well with you? Do they have their own programs, and are they sufficiently integrated with yours to give you an extra little bit of boost?
Yeah, I mean, we're all very, state money does not come through a program like NEI. That's all philanthropy. But we definitely are investing and supporting a lot of the same programs, whether it's TechTown or Michigan Women's Forward or Detroit Development Fund or Build Institute. You'll see MEDC dollars as well as philanthropic dollars there in those places. And we coordinate and definitely communicate. Um, so yeah, there's been definitely a lot of collaboration there. Um, and primarily that's been on the venture side for the most part.
Okay. Amy, how's TechTown doing right now with the COVID? Are you guys back in the office at all? I know, TechTown is a pretty lively place in most times. How is it right now?
Great question, and thank you for asking. We are back at it, but in a very limited fashion. So, if you know our famed TechTown CEO Ned Stabler, he's got a great video on all of our social network channels. But where he did, he's a funny guy, and there's humor injected. But we did a walking tour to show folks what to expect when you're interacting with our building. For now, there's a phased plan we have. So right now we're in a very limited approach. There's a key card entry into the building. Most of the TechTown staff is actually not working. If you're looking at me now, I'm in my office at home. So we have very limited staff in the building. We're welcoming back tenants and co-working members to the building, but we're actually not opening the building up to any guests at this moment. So there's all kinds of precautions in place. And again, if you take the time to watch that video, that does a really good job of walking through and showing people the temperature check, the swipe card, our sanitation policies, of course, all the wearing masks is required, using hand sanitizer. So it will be a phased approach, mirroring the leadership of our governor. We're doing the same at TechTown, given the volume of folks that we typically have in the building. And if you watch that video, you'll see, two of our main sort of large conference rooms and even some of the smaller conference rooms, we actually have converted for the time being into small office space. We're seeing a significant demand, honestly, from some of our corporate partners in spreading out their workforce. And so that means people aren't looking for half a floor of the building anymore, but they're looking for small private office suites to help spread out their staff from their larger spaces. So we are entrepreneurs. We live and breathe it ourselves. And that's certainly the approach that we're taking at TechTown right now in terms of providing flexible solutions to folks in a phased approach. And we will continue to be adaptive to the market and slowly welcome back more folks into the fold.
Good. Well, listen, I think we're about out of time for today's edition. So let me just try to summarize that. I think that from almost nothing 20 years ago, the entrepreneurial world, the startup world in Detroit has grown by leaps and bounds, and lots of players we have to thank for that. Among them, our guests, Amy Rencher from TechTown, Pam Lewis from the New Economy Initiative, and Jeff Sloan from Startup Nation. So we want to thank Amy and Pam. Thank you, and best of luck going forward. And Jack, your final thoughts, please.
Well, my final thoughts is it sounds like entrepreneurship is alive and well. And despite COVID, maybe even to some extent, COVID will give it a new stimulus. And what I wonder about, though, is, as you know perfectly well, John, a lot of entrepreneurs don't make it their first time. Actually, the Ford Motor Company is Henry Ford's third attempt. The first two went bankrupt. And I wonder if how we encourage people who tried something and just didn't work to have them get off the mat and try again.
Well, I think partly by using the resources available through TechTown and NEI, the NEI-supported network that we've talked about, with those 200 resources out there, whether it's Motor City Match or Southwest Detroit Solutions or whatever, that Prosperous and Hatch Detroit. There's dozens of these. And they do that sort of hand-holding that helps you understand that, once one failure does not mean that you're a failure. And so I think that, and as Jeff said, I think it's partly the psychology of someone who can, suffer the slings and arrows of a really tough thing and keep going. So
you may think this is an odd metaphor, but I was thinking and listening to these very talented folks today that in a way we're kind of like the world after the asteroid hit and wiped out the dinosaurs. There was some time before we saw what the dominant new life form would be. And I think we're right there. I think we don't know what the real successful companies of 20 years from now will be, but they're out there being born.
Yeah, I agree totally. I think as much as we've done in advancing the startup world in Detroit, I think we're still in the early stages of it. We're still creating that world, and I think we're going to see a lot more to come. As you said, 25 years from now, we don't know if Detroit will still be the Motor City or if it'll be something totally different. But we're on the way. I think that's the key thing.
That's absolutely right. John Gallagher, thanks for helping me put together this edition of Inside Michigan Business. I can't wait for our next episode.
Well, thank you. And Pam and Amy, if you're still there, thanks very much, and keep up the good work, okay?
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Absolutely.
You bet. Thanks, everybody.